If you think you could never be vegan, you're in the right place. And if you think there's something big that you'd really like to do, but it's probably too late, you're in the right place. My name's Michelle Olander. I think there has never been a more important time to move in a vegan direction. So I'm here every week to cheer you on and ask you to veg your best. What is vegan design? With Cayla, Maki Pittman and Dave Pittman from Harmless.Studio. Welcome back. One of my favorite things to look at on this podcast is the way that moving in a vegan direction can just open up your life. How the practice of limiting and eliminating the use of animals as products, how that can open up your awareness of what's happening all around us and how important our choices are. Today we're asking, what makes design vegan? What makes a design firm vegan? And I suppose we know that being vegan is not just what we eat, but what makes a business vegan? This week our guests are Cayla, Maki Pittman and Dave Pittman of Harmless.Studio in Maine. And you know, the clue is in the name, Harmless. Cayla and Dave do design and marketing for people making the world better, and their focus is on vegan and sustainable projects. Now, not long ago, I know there was more resistance among manufacturers and retailers towards using that word vegan. I still run into it, but in today's conversation with Cayla and Dave, you're going to get a sense of a new generation of businesses who are embracing it. Cayla is an interactive designer and digital marketer. She studied interactive design at the Rhode Island School of Design, which I may sometimes call RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. Cayla also holds a certificate in management from Harvard Business School and has been recognized by the United Nations, the University of Pennsylvania's Center for Social Impact, and PETA. Dave is an award-winning interdisciplinary designer and former creative director at the multinational ad agency Y&R. It was called Young and Rubicam back in my younger days. And as a designer, he has worked for Fortune 100 companies, global NGOs, and all kinds of spots in between. He is a certified vegan interior designer and holds a master's degree in industrial design, also from the Rhode Island School of Design, where he sometimes teaches. Cayla and Dave Pittman, I think, are the perfect team to introduce us to the concerns, the opportunities, and the challenges of designing while vegan. How they aim for sustainable and, yes, harmless. Enjoy the conversation, and I'll be back on the other side. Cayla, Maki Pittman, Dave Pittman from Harmless.Studio. Welcome to Veg Your Best.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. You know, I don't know. We have more and more vegan businesses and entrepreneurs, and I had a vegan interior designer on a couple weeks ago from Australia, and I think I got such feedback about that. I don't think people understand that vegans are everywhere. Vegans are everywhere doing everything. So why don't one of you tell me what the story is for Harmless.Studio? And I think the mission is in the name there somewhere, right?
Absolutely. So Cayla and I both had sort of a variety of experiences professionally before getting into this, doing marketing or design work for kind of a variety of clients in a variety of settings. And then it was in 2016, I sort of left the corporate advertising world to go to grad school at the Rhode Island School of Design to study a vegan design, basically vegan industrial design, so vegan product design. And the idea there was it was an opportunity to kind of get more involved in how products are made and get away from the question of sort of how do we sell products. But of course, that had been my career and Cayla's career to some extent up to that point. And did that for several years. And during that time, Cayla also went to the Rhode Island School of Design for interactive design. So we're sort of both adding these extra skills and both really interested in sort of the vegan world. Cayla started a company called Unicorn Goods that I sort of helped with a little bit. That was meant to be a store essentially for vegan physical products. And then it was in 2018 I finished grad school, and then Cayla graduated. I think it was a year later, and then we were sort of off to the races trying to figure out how to incorporate sort of these new things that we'd learned into our work moving forward. And we decided to start a sort of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary design firm to do sort of the design of physical goods, design of spaces, design of packaging, sort of a wide variety of things. Of course, web design, branding, that sort of thing. And so that was the sort of genesis of Harmless.Studio. And then over time, the studio has kind of evolved into being mostly packaging, websites, and brands. But of course, we still have these other things in our wheelhouse that we're also interested in. It's just we've found that there's more interest in that sort of thing, especially coming from a two-person studio, than there has been in, say, like the product design side of things, which tends to happen at a much higher sort of corporate level. And it tends to be much bigger companies doing that type of work. Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of the genesis of the studio.
So tell me, I have a lot of admiration for a lot of the artists and designers who've come out of RISD. So it's very nice to meet two more of you. We have close friends that have been involved with RISD to different extent. And I did not know that there was a vegan product design specialty there. So I'm very glad to know that, first of all. And second of all, what is it? Tell me.
Well, and sorry to jump in here again. There is no specialty there per se, but I made it. Yeah. So I went to their industrial design program for graduate school, and my thesis work there was vegan design. So I feel like I was figuring out what it was at the same time that I was introducing everybody else to it. But the idea for me with that was just that we have all these physical things that we interact with, and most of them aren't vegan. You find animal products in everything. So that seemed like kind of the next logical extension of, getting beyond food into all these other things.
I think that's fascinating because I don't think people realize, and I certainly didn't realize until very recently, how many glues and binders and products are in every single thing that we touch throughout our homes. Even toilet paper, cotton, so many things have labels, have all kinds of animal products in them that we didn't know about. So with your specialty in vegan product design, where did you begin, or where do you begin?
Well, I might let Cayla go ahead and take this one because really, my interest in product design really came out of her work with Unicorn Goods. So she started this store to sell physical products, mostly clothing, that didn't involve animal products. So I'll kind of let her tell that story.
Yeah, Cayla, tell us, where do you begin with that?
Sure. We both worked on Unicorn Goods as we were educating ourselves on this issue. For me, the idea to start a central website to list vegan and ethical products came from my own frustration trying to find a wool-free sweater. And at the time, I was vegetarian and hadn't really fully connected the idea of animal byproducts as being part of the same types of materials and sort of food items to avoid that vegans do. So in learning more about wool, trying to personally shop for a sweater, I kind of worked on the problem with Dave, and we both realized that there was a real lack of transparency around the materials going into everyday products. And then at the time, there was also a severe lack of availability of these products to the everyday consumer. You couldn't just go into a mall and easily find a sweater that didn't contain wool or some type of animal product. So from there, we kind of had this idea to make that process easier for consumers because we were doing a ton of research, directly reaching out to companies to get information. We felt like we could provide a service that was also personally rewarding and helping people support companies that were trying to make their supply chains more ethical and use materials that didn't involve animal cruelty at the time. So from that, we kind of expanded out toward all clothing. It was mostly clothing at the beginning, and looked specifically at leather, but also down. So that's another area that's seen a lot of growth. And all of these, since the time of doing this or starting this process 5, 6 years ago, has gotten a lot easier. The goal was to sort of help the pain point when it was more acute. But now it's easier than it's ever been to find properly labeled cruelty-free items. So in doing all of this research, I think Dave and I both felt that this was a really strong need that we could fill, that we were interested enough in actually working on this problem. And then we realized through our own interest in going to school and get sort of building our skill set that we were in a position to use our skills to solve the problem as a design partnership. Does that all make sense?
Of course it does. No, it just shows me how much there are so many levels to all of this. What you're interested in doing, what you can do. I know a few years ago, probably maybe 10 or 12 years ago, I tried looking for a down-free winter coat for my daughter, who needed a new one. And it was one of those catch-22s. If you Google down free or down alternative or vegan, you just get down coats. Now there are a lot more available now than there were 12 years ago. But it's almost like the thing you're trying to avoid is what you elicit in the Google searches.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And it's so ubiquitous.
I think part of what I failed to speak to is sort of the connection between online shopping and what we do today with Harmless.Studio. A big part of why vegan products we identified were so difficult to find was the lack of understanding on manufacturers or really retailers' side of things, and how you make vegan products findable to the people who are looking for them. So the exact problem you just talked about, using Google or using a search engine and using the word vegan is something that is a really common consumer behavior for online shopping. But retailers are increasingly less reluctant, but at the time were very reluctant to use the word vegan, or didn't understand that that was really important in order to have those products show up properly for the people who are looking for them. And that's something that we still see today with all sorts of food products. The word vegan is much more prominently used in looking for vegan products than, say, plant-based. And so that was sort of one insight we had, where we thought, wow, more companies should know about how to reach the right consumers, in addition to making it easier for these products to be made in the first place.
Yeah. So now, where do you find your clients these days? Are they looking? Are people looking for? I have a vegan product, so I don't want to just have a Manhattan, Madison Avenue firm doing it. I want a artisanal, vegan, plant-based sort of design firm. And what is a vegan design firm?
That's a good question. I'll let Dave explain this, since he can kind of speak to both of those points, how we find clients and sort of what makes us vegan.
Yeah. Well, I think, so, I mean, it varies, but I would say that a lot of our work these days is really, it's persuasive, it's semantic, it's conceptual, it's often like we're rarely doing physical product design these days. So it is mostly sort of the branding and promotion of existing vegan products. And those clients, sometimes we find them, sometimes they find us. But I would say that for a large percentage of them, it is important to them that we are vegan ourselves, either because that means that we have some level of insight or expertise that maybe other firms wouldn't have, or it's that they have, they want like people who are fully committed, sort of fully on board with the vegan idea. Like they like everything else about their company is vegan, so they want to go ahead and hire other vegans to work on it. People who are sort of on the same team. Anyway, so I think that's a big part of it. As far as the question about what vegan design is, it's I think it's a very broad term, but certainly when we're doing the physical product design work, that is materially, essentially, at its core, it's vegan, right? Like it means that we're avoiding animal products. It means that we're participating in this boycott movement to not use animal products, with the idea that we're putting pressure on the producers of things to use animal products less or to not use them at all. When we do the other kind of vegan design, more the conceptual sort of language driven persuasive stuff, we think about that more as like, we're dedicating our skills to a cause that we care about. So we're, at this point, I hate to say that we're experts or to toot our own horns, but we know a thing or two about promoting things and making things look good and, making things appealing. And so we're applying those skills to companies and products that we want to see do well in the world, because ultimately we're trying to make a future where animals aren't exploited or killed, to produce materials or food or whatever.
Well, now, for our listeners, what kind of materials that you might be in packaging or form placards or I'm trying to think of all the all the materials that you would create as designers in advertising or in packaging? What kind of materials are in there that are problematic?
Cayla, do you want me to?
Yeah, Dave is much better equipped to answer the physical material side of things. This was actually his thesis focus in grad school that led to the studio founding initially. So yes, please.
Well, so unfortunately, I think there's no clear-cut list anywhere, to my knowledge, and there's no sort of clear-cut method for sort of figuring this stuff out, except for just sort of like old-fashioned sort of journalistic kind of investigative work. So what we're usually doing is, like when we are working on a project like this, is basically just talking to the factories and saying, what's in this thing, and then saying, okay, well, and where does that come from? And where does that come from? Can I talk to the supplier? Can you give me the name of the company that made that thing? And then we sort of chase that down and say, hey, okay, so the tennis ball company said you made the felt. What's in the felt? How do you produce the felt? So I think that on some level at this point in human history, it may be impossible to completely be 100% truly purely vegan, but we just try to do the best we can to get as close as possible. So for us, that means like doing everything we can to make sure that there aren't any animal products in things. But I've been shocked over the years at the number of places where various sort of chemicals that are derived from chemicals that are derived from a part of an animal, like that end up in the most random places. So yeah, I mean, that's in some ways that's kind of where it all started for us.
So things like paints and papers and packaging,
absolutely,
wrappers. Okay.
Everything. Yeah, I mean, it really is, so I hate to go on a tangent here and I'll try to be brief, but part of what got us into this in the first place was a book called Pig 05049 that was a project a woman in the Netherlands made about all the places that animal products end up. And she had a very successful TED Talk about this. And that was really, I think, for me at least, I think for Cayla to some extent, was the big thing that got us interested in, wow, there are animal products inside bullets and crayons and computer chips and, all these places where you wouldn't expect to find them. So anyway, it seemed like if you want to be vegan, then that's certainly like, an important area to look at.
Yeah. Now, I think that sometimes our advocacy is limited to just asking for what we want and asking why is that not available without these materials, because sometimes we can't do everything and we can't make things change, but we can at least plant that question in the suppliers' brains, like, oh, maybe there's a market for these people who are suddenly asking these questions that no one has asked for 100 or 200 years or more.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, all right. So tell me now, what is your dream creation right now in terms of as designers? I think most designers have an idea of something that they really want to do and they really want to be involved with. Do either of you or each of you have a dream client or a dream project?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't have
That is a
anyone
very good question.
specific in mind. Yeah, Dave, do you have anyone specific in mind?
No specific client. There are two sides to this question though, that I think relate to the way that we work. One is that I think Cayla and I are always kicking around random ideas for things that we think would be funny or interesting. And sometimes there have been a number of times that we've actually followed through and ended up starting we're turning these imaginary companies into real companies. In a way that we never expect to get rich off of them, but we just want to see them exist in the world, and we have enough of the skills to make them a reality. So we have, I think, a lot of random ideas like that. Like I would love to make vegan hot dogs for dogs. It's just kind of like those types of sort of often pun-driven ideas. And the other thing is I think that I think we have like an ideal type of client, which is a client who's trying to grow. They've got something interesting that they're working on, and I think that they have maybe a certain profile in terms of their tolerance for risk and their tolerance for doing things a little bit differently, and sort of wanting what we do to be interesting. So much of the time, clients of all kinds who are clients of all kinds of companies, people often approach design as if they're designing their living room, right? So they make decisions about how to advertise their products in the same way that they make the choice about choosing a couch that they're going to sit on every day that only they'll see. And they sort of forget that often what makes the type of design that we do, right, like promotional design work and sort of packaging and the aesthetics of things that are out in the world that are trying to get attention, is they forget that those things are supposed to get attention. They're supposed to be surprising. They're supposed to be memorable. They're supposed to be noticeable. And so it's a very different sort of set of sort of needs that we're serving. And some clients really understand that, and some have a harder time with it. And so I'd say that the clients who really want to do interesting things that are going to be attention grabbing and are going to be noticeable and memorable and whatever, like those are the types of clients we sort of have the most fun with. And I think ultimately have the best work with. Yeah.
I see that. And I think that's a very good distinction to be made, because there are some packaging, like there's packaging that you can't miss and you remember and you know exactly where to go. I now have a bunch of little grandsons, and I know they recognize the packages of what they like. They stand out for them. They're not subtle like I might like my living.
Absolutely.
Tasteful, and from some sort of arcade idea. Yeah. So that's interesting. And do you feel that I'm wondering, do you think people who are leaning into veganism have a different thing they're looking for than people who are kind of old school vegans in terms of visuals or responses?
Definitely.
Definitely. I think, there are definitely different psychographic profiles that we target when we're approaching a project, and it's different for the stage of growth any company is in, as well as their goals moving forward. And it depends, we deal a lot with companies who are in the sort of scaling phase and helping them decide between if they should speak to only vegans and only their sort of early adopters and advocates, or if they should speak to a more mainstream market. And those are very different linguistic approaches. And they also have different aesthetic approaches in terms of how uncomfortable you want to make people seeing your product on the shelf for the first time. And then these considerations are also different if someone is trying to do mostly online sales versus trying to get shelved at a major grocery store. Dave, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, one of the ideas that I think that's really standing out to me from what you're saying, though, is that context matters. And that's something that we end up, saying a lot, right? So it does absolutely matter sort of who you're going after, where the thing is going to be seen or encountered. Absolutely. And in terms of the question about sort of legacy vegan companies versus maybe some that are more on the edge of being mainstream, that sort of thing, I do think that you see, the company. I see three common strategies right in this world. It's like there's the sort of legacy vegan companies that are maybe a little bit sort of hippie or sort of crunchy, or kind of the tradition, the old school kind of Whole Foods aesthetic, right? Granola, like the thing, companies that have been around 20, 30 years, and they've been selling veggie burgers made out of black beans and whatever, and that's all great, but
Like Dr. Braun in the 70s type things. Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. That, and those types of brands, they're not going anywhere, but they're also not really geared up for growth in general. They're kind of trying to just, continue to do what they've always done. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then you have this other category of sort of vegan companies. They're not really marketing themselves as vegan at all. And they're really targeting the mainstream, and they're very high growth companies with a lot of money, and, like Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat, Oatly. Well, Oatly's maybe an exception, but in general, they're trying to be really sort of sexy and super trendy and relevant and whatever for a very mainstream audience. And then there's another category that we don't talk about that much. That's kind of this, the companies that maybe someday will be in Impossible Foods, but right now they just need to get traction somewhere, and they're not going to go from being nothing to being, a billion-dollar company plus without like steps in between. And so often those companies are the ones where we think of appealing to a vegan audience is really important and really relevant. And they don't need to be a mainstream company, but they're also not a sort of legacy vegan company. They're kind of still trying to be sexy and exciting and whatever, but they can be much bolder in how they talk about like why they're doing what they're doing. So they can say like they're doing this to reduce harm to animals or to save the planet, or they can sort of appeal to maybe a smaller audience that's much more concerned with the issues and that sort of thing, instead of this model of more like being a Trojan horse and tricking people into tricking mainstream consumers into buying your product because you're so exciting and new and whatever. So anyway, that's kind of how I think about it.
That's interesting, because I have been gratified, but also surprised at how quickly the how we say that typically people come to veganism through the three doors of either animal ethics, health, or the climate, environment, ecology. I have been surprised
Absolutely.
how that third door of the environment and climate has just exploded. And it seems to me packaging reflects that more than that. I think a lot of things position themselves as healthy, whether they're vegan or not vegan. But in terms of the environment, that seems to be an area that's visually impactful. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Definitely. I feel like I'm talking a lot, though. I feel like
Kayla
should take this.
No, I definitely agree with that. I think also the argument is much harder to. It's a lot harder to argue with the environmental reasons to not consume animal products. There's a lot more data back, that is very robust and concretely backs that up as a positive consumer choice. And one of the most impactful things you can do, right, to make your footprint as small as possible. On the health side, there definitely, are health reasons to go vegan, or especially plant-based. But to your point, many vegans don't do it for health reasons. And those who do are generally not buying sort of the more indulgent products that are geared toward the mainstream. So that's something that we discuss a lot when we're marketing a new product. Health is often not a major selling point in terms of getting people to buy a product initially. It's sort of a follow-on benefit. But especially in the food space, buying something that's indulgent and delicious, and oh, by the way, it's better for the planet and it's better for animals, and it happens to be vegan, is a much more compelling way to get someone to make an initial purchase, especially if the branding is confident and sort of well put together and speaks to those values in a very visual way. But yeah, there's no question that, as we go forward, that more and more products will continue to sort of address climate change and reduce their footprint, especially as we are demanding it as the people buying those products, for sure.
Because I'm guessing that visuals that remind us of the impact of animals can be tricky, because vegans can feel very uncomfortable with that, because even if they agree and they're glad that that exists, they don't want to necessarily think about it, because very often that's what they just don't want to think of animals being harmed. And we have not gotten to a place where animals are not being harmed. So and I would think that for people who are still kind of on the fence and leaning into it, they also might not want to be reminded of animals being harmed. So I'm wondering if is that part of why climate and health are visually taking over that part of vegan design?
I would
Absolutely.
say yes, definitely. Yeah, I think that's something that we see, but all three of these issues are not what we use mostly when we're trying to get someone to buy a product for the first time. It's really difficult to kind of tap into these reasons that are kind of universal when someone's almost making an impulse buy. But what we see is that for products that do have a deep resonance ethically with the consumers, that the return, they're more likely to remain a customer, and they're more likely to advocate for the product itself, which is especially, relevant when you're talking about, something going viral, or people sort of convincing their friends to buy it, and growing organically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think what you're telling me is you're trying to get eyes and attention, and you're not and you want it to be in alignment with the other things, but your focus is like, how do I get your attention and get you to pick it up and maybe put it in your shopping cart or click on it online.
Right. And I think, because so many of our clients are founders of the companies themselves, or CEOs of very early stage scaling ventures, because we are vegan, but we're applying these sort of more broad market force tools to the marketing, we can kind of identify that as a problem point early on, and bring to the product the marketing that's going to help it grow the fastest, instead of what resonates the most with the founders at that point. A lot of our clients describe their time working with us as sort of brand therapy. Like, a lot of what we do is sort of, we're very sort of hands-on and partner really closely with who we work with, so that they kind of understand the strategy of what we're bringing to helping them grow.
So you guys are telling us that you are vegan and you are ethical, but you're trying to make people's businesses explode too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny, because it's in advertising or just sort of marketing more broadly. I think there's always this dance, right, where you're not always saying exactly what you mean, and people who are making purchasing decisions might tell you that they're buying something for one reason, but if you dig a little deeper, it's actually some other reason. And so there's kind of this weird set of like codes that we're all kind of like speaking in and playing with and that sort of thing. So I think that's a major facet of marketing vegan products, is this idea that like you said, vegans are compelled by, or at least generally I think compelled by, the idea of not harming animals, but at the same time they don't want to see pictures of it on a carton of milk or something, right? So they're like not necessarily like wanting to look at animal suffering all the time. They've already made a decision to do less harm, so you don't have to shove it in their faces all the time, and that's not necessarily like exciting to them. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if somebody is not a vegan, or they're not interested in veganism, then they're certainly going to be turned off by that. So so we sort of might allude to the fact that no animals are involved and that sort of thing, but we're also still being very strategic about what's going to make this product do the best, because ultimately that will be the thing that's best for animals, right? I mean not just animals, but if we're just talking about the the animal suffering problem, we're sort of dancing around it in a very strategic way.
I think this is such a fun conversation for me because I get continually things online where people say, I don't know why you're talking about food because veganism is not a diet. And I understand that. And I also think the diet is often what is the hurdle for people, because there's no veganism without eating in a vegan compliant way for an individual. And I think so many people who can be a little on the, you're not fully vegan, none of us is. And I love when I hear that there's so much more all of us can do. And there's so many other questions we can ask. And if you feel like, I just feel like if you're putting somebody else down for not being vegan enough, I think it's the mirror. We need to look, where are we not being vegan enough, instead of worrying about what other people are doing. So just to see how many businesses we need to come up and bring people's attention to all these different parts of what it means to be a consumer functioning in the 21st century in the Western world. Where do you see a real need, a product that hasn't come out yet or hasn't been developed, or something that you look around and it's just not really there yet?
Oh, wow. Like, where to start? I think like Dave said, we're always having these ideas of things that should exist and don't, and have to really control ourselves of starting them ourselves.
Start all the businesses.
Yeah, I mean, just locally, like we live in rural Maine now, and there is a lack of vegan restaurants here, which we really miss. We used to live very close to Plant City, who's they're still to this day a client of ours, and Plant City X as well, and we really miss their food. we have to, control ourselves from starting vegan restaurants almost on a daily basis. But yeah, I mean, from anything, like we also, I think as people who are very in tune with design and the way things are made, Dave especially with his background in industrial design, I think purchasing things in general tends to be challenging for us because we're hyper perfectionist and we expect a lot from the things that we do buy and bring into our lives, because we think of that as almost a vote. Anytime you spend money, you're promoting that to be made more. And that goes for vegan materials, but it goes for sort of design details too. But yeah, restaurants for sure. And then I'm not sure if Dave has anything specifically outside of that, but it's almost too many things to count. I wish there were more of us, I think.
I'm just going to interrupt because you said Plant City, and that's in Providence, where you used to be in Rhode Island. And
right.
So everybody's listening from somewhere, Plant City is a fun spot. And Providence is a very vegan friendly city. Rhode Island,
absolutely.
Even rural Rhode Island is moving along in that direction. So Dave, you tell me, what's the thing that doesn't exist yet that just you really are waiting for?
Man, it's funny. I think I've been vegan long enough now that I've just kind of forgotten. I've like moved on from so many of these products. Like I think there are probably so many things that I gave up on a long time ago. But it is funny to think that, I mean, there's so many decisions that I make, say in a given year, or I mean even a given day. Consumption decisions about what to buy. That I'm always just amazed that there aren't more options. I mean, it's the best way of saying this. There are plenty of options if you're looking in general these days. If you're looking for a vegan thing, like say a vegan, like you mentioned, a winter coat or a pair of shoes or whatever. But it's mind blowing to me that you can't go necessarily to any given mainstream brand and be confident that you'll be able to find something vegan. There are certainly some brands that do it much better than others, but it's amazing to me that that we have to that we still have to do research if we're looking for, like, oh, I really like this pair of, I don't know, Nike shoes, and now I need to check to see if these shoes are in fact vegan. And I know that Nike makes some vegan shoes, but are these vegan shoes, right? Like, it's amazing to me that it's so easy to replace materials like leather with all kinds of amazing alternatives that I get that it will be a long time before companies don't do that at all. And I do believe that someday we won't use leather at all. I don't know when that will happen, but in the meantime, it's amazing to me that companies don't just have at least one option for everything they make that's vegan. And along the same lines, I'm amazed that, like, if you wanted to buy a car, used or new, um, it is very common to do things like put leather on the steering wheel, but like only on the steering wheel. So you can get vegan upholstery everywhere else, but just like the steering wheel or the shifter knob will have leather on them. And that's like the only leather in the car. It's just mind blowing to me that it's not just like much easier to avoid altogether. I mean, it would be so easy for them to do. It's mind blowing to me.
I would just add, and that being said, to Dave's point, I think it's not a question of, for example, vegan leather on steering wheels not being available. It's more a matter of it's not being used. And I think, in the example of the coat as well, it's not that there aren't amazing down-free vegan coats out in the world. It's just a matter of them being difficult to find and that there not being enough of them. So I think in the place we are today, like, pretty much everything that can be vegan is being done in some form. There just needs to be more of it. And a lot of that comes down to people caring enough to seek those out and buying them and having those purchases be as easy and clear and available as possible.
And the other problem is what happens, I think sports people, is then things start becoming very plasticky. You get a lot of plastic, a lot of synthetics, and a lot of, so we worry about, is that a better choice? Is it maybe,
Sure.
and the children and people and sweatshops that are working on them in various places. And so we worry about the workers and exposed to these materials. So then I see among people I work with that it becomes like an overwhelm. It's like, now what do I do? When I could just shut my brain off for 10 seconds and buy the thing I've always bought.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I would say too that, to the point about, the plastics and chemicals and of course, exposure of workers and that sort of thing, or exploitation of workers. It's funny because we always talk about things like that, but then we never talk about the flip side of that, right? Which is, if you buy the default, say, you're buying a car with leather upholstery because you're trying to avoid, synthetic leather because of the petroleum-based products or other chemicals, or that type of thing. We forget how toxic leather is, right? I mean, it's skin naturally biodegrades very quickly, and it requires a very toxic sort of cocktail of chemicals to preserve it in the way that we do. And then on top of that, it's produced in places where workers are doing that without are processing these things without any protection, and in places that are horribly polluted and sort of forgotten because nobody else wants to do it, right? So it's such a dirty industry that it often gets sort of pushed off and farther to the margins, where there's it's a far dirtier process and far more environmentally damaging, and often far worse for people than the sort of the alternatives, of which you get a wide variety of alternatives, right, in terms of their environmental damage and that sort of thing. But it's just always really important to remember how horrible for the environment and people something like leather is.
That's a very good point. I'm really glad that you brought that up. That's an excellent point for us to keep remembering, because I think even my brain continues to be brainwashed by these ideas that there's clean, natural things, and there are
absolutely.
things. And even though I know what you're saying, that is sort of what I was saying to you, that like, oh, this is really dirty if I buy that. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so to make something like leather last as long as it does requires things like chromium and mercury and various heavy metals, and I mean it's a really nasty process. And then of course the workers. I mean, like in Bangladesh, where a lot of tanning happens. The people who work in the tanning industry, I mean, are often not making it past 25, 30. I mean, they're horribly exploited and exposed to all kinds of horrible, very toxic things. So, I mean, I know there's a little bit of like a chuckle in my voice there, but it's it's dumbfounding how horrible the industry is. I mean, it's just horrific. Yeah.
So so what you're saying, this is really a false juxtaposition, a false dichotomy, this idea that there's
Absolutely.
something that's not
Right.
dirty and all these plastics are dirty. And I know you guys have a hard out for the top of the hour here. And I think you're going to have to come back on another time and talk about this. I know this is maybe a little sad topic to end on, but I'm so glad you're doing the work you're doing. Dave Pittman, Cayla Maki Pittman, thank you so much for making time for Vedge Your Best. And I think there are going to be a lot of questions for you. So I'm going to try and put together some questions and maybe throw them to you on Instagram and see if you can answer them for our listeners.
Happy to do that. Thank you so much for having us. Yeah, we love talking about what we do in this issue. It's really close to our hearts. So thank you for allowing us the opportunity.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I'm just glad to know you're out there.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So what did you think of Cayla and Dave Pittman? You can find out a lot more about them at their beautiful website, Harmless.Studio. And the book, I wanted to mention that the book that Dave mentions by artist Christian Medertsma is called Pig 05049, and that is linked in the show notes, as well as the TED Talk that Dave mentions by the same artist, Christian Medertsma. And that's called How Pig Parts Make the World Turn, which is really a fascinating few minutes to listen to. I don't think it's what you're expecting. I don't want to ruin it, but it's not what you're expecting. And I think one of the most thrilling, dare I say it? Yeah. One of the most thrilling parts of moving in a vegan practice, in a vegan direction, developing your vegan practice, is the way doors open in your awareness. Doors open in your awareness of so many things about how we live on this planet. And though there are, of course, so many limits to what each of us can do, especially when changing other beings and other things, there are actually pretty few limits to what we can imagine and try and how we personally can show up with those beings and things. In our businesses, in our relationships, in our purchases, all our behaviors, we always have the option of considering how we might be able to cherish more and harm less. I hope you'll follow Dave and Cayla at Harmless.Studio to learn more about their work and their fascinating clients. And okay, kids, until next week, there are so many ways to do this thing. Get out there and veg your best. Veg Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Veg Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.